and welcome to the third seat for leaders navigating the chaos of growth. In this episode of Third Seat, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. You're actually going to hear from not one, but two CEOs. That's Dave Allen, founder and global CEO of Brandpie, and his new CEO of the EMEA region, Will Bosanko. Brandpie are a global brand consultancy that specialises in aligning brand strategy at key pivotal moments and optimizing that brand for the change that business is going through, whether that's M&A, whether that's growth, or whether it's a strategic shift. I have worked with Brandpie as a coach and as a leadership development consultant for the last 3 years, and through the transition that we're going to be discussing in this episode. It was a high-stakes transition for Brandpie, putting a very young, on paper, CEO, Will, who's just turned 30 as he shifted into the role, into an established business in London. Brandpie have offices in London, Oslo, New York and Singapore, but Will's running the largest part of that business. And you'll hear all about the decision-making process behind that shift and that handover from Dave, and also what it felt like for Will stepping up into the role with big shoes to fill. So that's enough from me. Let's get into the episode. Dave Allen and Will Bosanko from Brandpie, thank you very much for joining me on the third seat. This is the first time we've had multiple guests, so I think maybe we need a fourth seat for this one. It's great to have you both here. Dave, you're on a boat, which is exciting.
I am on a boat in the Arabian Sea, which is quite good fun. And thank you for inviting me to come on third seat. Looking forward to talking to you, as always, Rebecca.
You're two of my favourite people, so I'm looking forward to this. It's fun, and it's been really...
I knew that.
It's been really nice to work on this journey with you. So, first time we've had multiple guests, and the first time we've talked about this topic. So, today we are going to be talking about your move to bring Will up into the CEO role within Brandpie. And we're going to be talking to get both of your takes on how that's felt, how it's looked, how you've communicated that out to the team, and how you've made it work. Because it has worked, hasn't it? It's been a really quite smooth transition from the outside looking in, at least.
We think it's worked, Rebecca.
You think
No, I'm going to say from my perspective, it's totally working. And It's still a year. You know, it's Will's first year. He's completed his first year. Massive sort of impact. But, you know, it's a journey for all of us.
Yeah. I didn't think of that, actually. It is almost a year to the day, isn't it?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
almost exactly a year.
Great. So we're going to reflect on your first year of working in this way.
Is this like a performance review that we're stepping into now with you both?
We'll try and make sure it doesn't turn into one of those. Maybe a Dave performance review on how it's felt to be handed over to.
Let's do some 360 feedback, shall we?
Yeah. Right. So I'm going to start with you, Dave. I won't sort of hand you both questions the whole time, but it would be good to start with Dave and really think about what the main catalyst was for making this decision. Because I think from the point of view of lots of our listeners, really often for a CEO or founder, they are thinking about the time that they will hand the business over for whatever reason. And it would be really good to understand your thought process, if you like, behind making that decision to hand over the baton to Will.
Yeah. I mean, let me talk a little bit about succession and then come to your sort of specific question. So as a CEO, and I've probably been a CEO now for getting on for over 35 years. And, I spent a lot of time working with Martin Sorrell at WPP. And, when you've got 23 odd companies in your group, you get to see and think about succession an awful lot. And I think one of the things I learned is that succession is probably the most difficult thing you have to do as a chief executive. So when it came to my own business and thinking about succession, I probably started thinking about succession a year, 2 years into the business. And Brandpie is now, 16 years old. And succession never really goes out of your mind because you know you can't go on forever. Times will change and dynamics will change in the market and you need different people. And so you've got to be really honest with yourself and think about how is this business going to carry on when you're not the right person to run it. Therefore, you're looking for successors continuously. The other thing I learned, particularly when I was at WPP, finding successors is unbelievably difficult. And finding people who have all of the characteristics that's needed for leadership is unbelievably hard. So you end up going, well, I think that person's right, but I'm not quite sure. And you put them in situ and your gut instinct proves to be right and they're not quite right and they don't work out and 3 years later they've left. So finding successors is unbelievably difficult. And so, my advice to anybody thinking about succession is to start early and to think about looking for the person. It means you've got to understand yourself, and it means you've got to understand what you're good at, what you're not good at, what type of person will fit into the business. And then, when it came to Brandpie, I probably, like any good CEO, you back about 4 or 5 horses. And you have people in the company who you think might be a successor, might not be a successor. You try and mentor them all. You try and guide them all. You try and coach them all. And you are continuously talking to your team and going, what do you think about that? And how are you reacting to that person? And is that person motivating and engaging you? And so you're continuously assessing, and then you suddenly get to a point like I did just over probably about 14 months ago, where I decided that it was time to appoint Will as European CEO and for me to relinquish that role. And once you've got yourself comfortable and once you're clear that that person is the right person, then you go at it gangbusters. And, the key thing for me is to be invisible supporting Will, but be very visible. I'm still the global CEO and still run the business, but, I've handed the biggest part of the business over to Will to run. And I just got out of his way, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. How did you make that decision? You had 4 or 5 horses in the race, as you said. What was it about Will that really kind of put him front and center of that decision-making process for you?
He basically started doing the job before I'd given him the job. Yeah. And, that's always a smart move for any young person. Don't wait to be told to do the job. Start doing the job, and then you'll impress the boss. So Will started doing all of the things I was encouraging the others to do and doing them very successfully. So getting on planes, going to events, networking, relationship building, converting clients, exciting people by bringing in work, getting the people behind him, doing great work. There's a real spectrum of talents you've got to have to be able to lead a business like this. And Will was the person who demonstrated he'd got all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Will, you got that tap on the shoulder, sort of Christmas time, I guess, last year. How did that feel for you?
Well, first things first, I recognize what a huge decision that was for Dave. And I was more thinking about the impact of the business and Dave in that moment, probably than I actually was thinking about myself and where I was in my career and that career shift. Dave mentioned the point earlier of doing the job, I guess, before you're doing it. It wasn't necessarily in pursuit of that title. I think that's the key thing. I just care immensely about our business and want everybody to love what they're doing and enjoy it and for us to be successful. And those things as I thought more about how am I going to approach this with great mentorship, great guidance, but also think, how can I do this in a way that's uniquely me as well, and set a new chapter for the business with clear intention. How could I lean into the things that I was doing and really cared about versus try and emulate Dave and Dave's way of operating? He and I have shared and do share many, many values, I think, that first and foremost brought me to Brandpie. You know, I loved meeting Dave. I loved working with Dave. And the tone and culture that he built within the business was something that I admired and that actually enabled me to grow immensely over the past 5 years. So those things are sacred and untouchable, right? But how can you continue to keep them in motion and moving forwards in your own unique way as a new leader for the business? It's also the first time we'd had a new leader for the EMEA business. Right, Dave was our founder. So I anticipated, I guess, to answer your question, when I got that news, this is going to be a big moment for the business. And we have to think really carefully about how we manage that and bring everybody through and set this as an exciting moment for everybody, not just a leadership change. That mattered a lot to me, that this felt like it was going to be an injection of momentum and energy into the business for everybody. So less about me, more about, I guess, the impact on the business was what I was thinking about, and how could we just set this as a great moment for each and every one of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you did start thinking about you, because obviously you do need to come back to how am I going to land as a leader? How am I going to have the impact that I want? How did you start to think about that? So how did you sort of put it all into practice and really land well?
Well, I don't think anybody can ever really prepare you for your first venture into a chief executive position.
Top job. Yeah.
Yeah. As Dave put rightly at the onset, it's a drastic change in terms of, you know, the amount of responsibility, also the amount of things you're across. So your rhythm and your stamina has to adapt very, very quickly. I would say I've learned that over the past year. And ensuring that for every single moment and meeting or team that you're working with, you try and show up as your absolute best self, no matter how tired you are, no matter how fatigued your brain is. You know, what you're being asked for an opinion on or a perspective on is the most important thing to that person, right? So it's really integral that you try and maintain your stamina. Yeah. So those types of things, I think I got to learn very quickly, and I continue to learn now. But at the same time, it felt like it would be quite easy to obsess about this and try and create a new version of myself, or a new, I'm in this position now. It's a new mode of will. And actually, if I reflect on it, I think in every chapter of my life, I've lent into leadership, a leadership role in whatever thing I was doing, whatever group I was in. There are some innate qualities that have carried me through my life so far. And I don't think leadership comes with an age bracket either. I think it's about the way you conduct yourself, the way you speak to people, the energy and the way you inspire people as well. So not to lose sight of the things, I guess, that have brought me to where I am now and try and change myself too drastically, right? That was another thing that I acknowledged stepping into it, because you think at the onset, right, time to set a totally new tone, or do I have to reinvent myself in a way? And that felt like it would be really inauthentic. And there was no need to do that. Especially
stepping up within a business that you've worked in for a significant period of time. You can't have a complete personality transplant, can you? Because like you say,
no. But rightly, everybody rightly looks at you very differently too. So no matter how much equity or goodwill you've built within a team, suddenly people are looking at you in a very different light. So you have to acknowledge that responsibility as well. And a lot of this is about a fearlessness, I suppose. Yeah. And people say, oh, you were made CEO at 30 and make a big deal of the age thing, I suppose. But actually, it's just it's this continuous thread of fearlessness, I guess, that is important in leadership, that you have to be willing to step forward when you might not be totally comfortable, push yourself out of your comfort zone, set an example on how to embrace being uncomfortable, because that's where we all really grow. So
taking responsibility.
take responsibility for that too.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you created a change of structure, right? You created the EMEA business, and Dave, you stepped up into that global role. What was the catalyst for that? What was the decision making around that restructure?
Well, I think the sort of the EMEA role came sort of slightly later. So we were thinking about taking over the sort of London operation. And then as we've started to build the business across Europe, we've started looking at other regions. So between Will and I, and we've started to think about sort of a hub and spoke model, and Will's been building some phenomenal relationships out in Scandinavia, Iceland. We've got great projects in France. We're looking at other markets. And part of what I wanted to do for the business more broadly was build a global footprint. So back in my WPP days, for a business like this, you needed 23 officers. You clearly don't now. And so, we can provide the needs of global clients from the US, Europe, and Asia with probably just 3 localized teams. And so we've now opened up in Singapore. That's what I've been spending my time sort of doing. And Will's been thinking about how he's going to grow the business in Europe. And then we started to think about the Middle East. We started to think about Africa. The US team is starting to think about Canada, Mexico, other countries in the Americas. And, we want to provide those multinational clients that we've got with our capabilities. We want to know the local and understand the local cultures, but equally, we operate at a global level, and ultimately we're trying to reposition and do brand transformation projects for these complex businesses as those sort of pivotal business moments. So the stepping stone to having somebody think about how do we grow our business in EMEA and build on what we'd done in Europe to date was quite a big stepping stone. And I think it was about, I can't remember precisely, but maybe 3 months in when we changed the title and sort of made it Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And that, I think, sends an important signal. We then opened in Singapore. We then did the announcement of the Nordics, head of the Nordics region, sort of fairly recently. And so that all starts to sort of give you that reassurance that we can handle the most complex international programs for our clients.
That's fascinating, though, isn't it? Because when you talk about stepping stone, you've made that step to appointing Will, and then it's opened up that next area of potential growth and scope to expand further.
I would say at the same time, Rebecca, just on that, there was a real positive that's come from it too. And I think we're actually a simpler business than we've ever been when it comes to regional accountability, the ways in which we operate, how we connect across the regions. So though it might sound like adding layers, I think what we've actually done is really simplify the way we structure and understand the business. Yeah. And if you were to ask somebody, I think internally at Brandpie now, are they clear on the shape and structure of the business and what we're trying to achieve? I would hope that they would be far more confident and clear now, perhaps, than they might have been 18 months ago, because we now have faces to represent those different elements of the business and a bit more regional accountability. So the net positive is that we're actually a lot simpler and sharper in how we make decisions, I would say.
Yeah. So rather than putting additional layers in, it's kind of crystallizing and simplifying what might have been fuzzy previously or unclear to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feels that way.
Yeah, that's really, really smart thinking. Talking of team then, that's probably something you had to think about quite carefully, right? How were you going to communicate this change to the team? So what was the thought process around that, and how did you communicate it to the team, and how did you make sure that it was communicated well and you didn't lose momentum through that? Because it's something that, any kind of change like that can obviously result in distraction. And
yeah, my style is very much to try and seed it so that people know in the main what's coming. Everybody might not know what's coming, but lots of conversations with people one-on-one, sounding out, is this a good moment to make this move? People who you have close as your advisors, talking it through with them. Do you think it's a good time to make this move? Discreetly talking to some of the younger people in the team, not directly saying I'm going to do this, but how's it working with these folks? And I guess I'm continuously doing soundings, 20 times a day, 7 days a week with people on everybody in the business. And it's just subliminal. You're always just tuning into who's rising, who's loved, who's respected, who's making a move. And you've got to keep very abreast of your people. And it was just really, really clear to me that everybody was going, this is the time to do it. This is a good time to do it. And so, we pulled everybody together and made the announcement, and spontaneous applause. So you knew you'd made the right decision at the right time. If everybody goes, oh, you're in a bit of trouble. and nobody did.
That's brilliant.
It was just literally spontaneous applause from everybody in the whole company. And it was a whole company meeting. So, and, I don't think I made Will stand up and do a speech or anything crazy like that. It was just a simple announcement that Will is now going to be CEO. And that freed up my time, best thing that's ever happened. I've got my time back and I can now do other things and Singapore and things like that. And I was spinning too many plates and, keeping control of those plates and being sort of in charge of that spinning is never good. And so giving Will the European plate to look after and spin, that means my life is a lot better. And, I'm now committed to building a team of young people who can take this business forward over the next 20, 30 years. And, Will is the first step in that sort of process.
Yeah, exciting times. So, Will, you post that announcement and the spontaneous round of applause. There's an actual job to be done and some work to set out on. What were the first things that you decided to do when you took the helm, if you like?
Well, I go back to what I said at the beginning, I think, about wanting it to be a good moment for everybody in the team. And I remember that announcement and the applause and thinking there's so much goodwill here. I need to do something now that feels like it's a moment for everybody and we're kickstarting this new chapter together. And we ran a session, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks after that, where we brought everybody into our clubhouse, our space in London. And we engaged everybody in where shall we focus, right? What should we lean into? Where should we place our emphasis this year so that we can grow, so that we can achieve more together, so that we can be successful? And almost crowdsourced what we were going to focus on as a team. And I remember saying to the EMEA team in that moment, I really want to make this a really high communication period for the business where we talk a lot, we come together a lot, we kickstart maybe a new evolution of our culture that is more about togetherness and coming together to discuss things and have those channels and forums for communication, which Dave has always been brilliant at, but just acknowledging that and demonstrating that was going to continue to be important, I think sent an important message to the business. And we also had some fun, right? Part of this as well is showing everybody we're going to have a great time. There's going to be ample opportunity. This is good news for everybody. So the cultural side of things felt very important indeed. And then my advice to anybody stepping into this or in a similar position is don't run before you can walk either. Take your time and get to understand the fundamentals of the business. Get your feet under the table properly first before you start changing anything, because ultimately the business is successful and growing for a reason. So this is not about changing things. This is just about building upon all of the great stuff the business is already doing.
Yeah.
So maybe about 3 to 6 months in, it became clear, well, what could some interesting new levers be for growth? Where could we invest our energy and our time to create new opportunities for us and for our clients? And that's, as Dave referenced earlier, where the hub and spoke thought came. And and the idea of expanding more regionally with representatives in some of our key geographies. So don't rush it, I guess, is my reflection. I really tried not to rush it. And I'm quite an impatient person, Rebecca, you know this. I'm always wanting to, momentum is very, very important to me. And I think you can have that momentum, sure, and get that spirit of energy within the business. But, take your time would be my advice to anybody stepping into that role.
Yeah.
Because there's a heck of a lot to get your head around. That's for sure.
A surprising amount considering how long you've been in the business, right? It's completely different.
It's a totally different vantage point.
Space. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because the thing that was sort of rattling around my mind, or the question that was rattling around my mind, I suppose, was, do you think you had the luxury of taking it slower because you'd already been in the business, you'd already proven yourself? Because I wonder whether somebody coming in completely new from outside would feel the need to hit the ground running and add value really early on.
It's a balance, right? Because you can hit the ground running with the in-person sessions, getting the team together, showing that momentum, but balance yourself by not announcing 10 new initiatives, 10 new goals for the business. We're going to rewrite our local EMEA strategy. You just look like you're grabbing on too many levers, and you're power hungry, and you're in the role for the wrong reason, right? So continue doing all the great things you're already doing. Absolutely inject momentum and energy into the team and the business, but balance that with not running headfirst into too many new ideas or initiatives, because my advice to anybody would be you don't have time to see them all through. So Dave gave me this very good advice: pick 2 or 3 things a year that are big decisions and really think them through and see them through. And I continue to carry that with me now into my second year as well, thinking what would they be this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Just a reminder, I'm Rebecca Morley and we are Third House. We help ambitious entrepreneurs to become better, more intentional leaders. You can find us at wearethirdhouse.com. There you can find a free, really quick 5-minute assessment that you can take to see where you are on your leadership journey and to learn more about working with us to shape your own leadership path. Now back to the episode. You've both mentioned culture in what you've talked about so far. So I have a question for you, Dave, and it's just reflecting on the whole journey of Brandpie, and actually probably even before that at WPP. What do you think is different in terms of what the leadership needs are now, or what makes a good leader now versus when you started Brandpie in 2008? If anything, you might not think that it's different, but
no, I think the characteristics of leaders have not changed that much, if at all. And there's always been different types of leaders, and I've worked with different types of leaders. There's those high directive leaders that think they know best and they tell you what to do, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And I don't work particularly well with those types of people. And I tend to approach leadership more from a point of view of taking people with you because they understand what you're doing. And then, the role of the leader is to support the team in executing that. So to lead, but also be there to support everybody to do, what's required and what's being asked of them. And, if you can provide that guidance, that mentorship, then you become very respected and very trusted. And so people will follow you. And so you've got to work the circle of leadership. And, at the right moment in time, the advice I gave, well, I had this conversation with, I think it was the CEO of United Airlines when I was doing a webcast with him. And I asked him, how many decisions a year do good leaders take? And he said 4 or 5.
Yeah, I listened to that one.
Yeah, that was that's my impression of leadership. It's, the little decisions run along quite nicely, and, you can be taking 40, 50, 60 decisions a day, but it's the 3 a year that really matter. Do we open in Singapore or don't we? That's a significant investment. Do we, shift from one software technology to another software technology. That's a big transformation for the whole company. And we're just going through a whole company transformation to sort of base the business in Figma. So, it's a big investment. It's a big decision. We're doing it across all 4 businesses. And, we've experimented, we've piloted, all of those sorts of things. And then, now we've decided to roll it out across the whole company. And we've got a program over the next 6 months to make sure nobody's left behind and everybody can transition properly and everybody's trained properly. So your leadership is really that, in my mind. And I don't have a lot of time for the people who shoot from the hip and fire and often don't think before they fire. And as soon as you meet one and you think, well, I'm not going to work well with you. And surprisingly, they don't become clients. And so I think Will seeing that, and then other people in the team seeing that, I can see lots of people growing and developing. And I have this phrase, which they all know really well, is that I'm trying to build a culture where people shape and manage their own destiny. And that means you've got to take full responsibility for your career. And if you take full responsibility, then you behave exactly like Will behaved for the last 5 years. And if you don't take full responsibility, you sit there waiting to be told what to do. And ideally, I want more and more people who really understand what they want to get out of our company and thrive and grow, and also support the team. And I think we've made huge headway over the last 5 or 6 years in building that culture and getting people to understand they can actually shape their own destiny.
Yeah, absolutely. That feels like a thread, a current that runs through the whole of Brandpie. So, Will, that's quite a big legacy to take on, isn't it? Because that's very much kind of Dave's, I was going to say ideology. I'm not sure that's the right word, but we'll use it.
Sounds good to me.
Pace. Dave, you have a philosophy is probably a better word.
That's a nicer word.
How do you take that and run with it and make sure that that still runs through the team? Because that's quite, especially with, I went to an event earlier this week and there was a lot of chat about Gen Z and how actually there's a fear seemingly from the next generations coming up to take responsibility, to take charge of their own destiny. So how have you carried on bringing that philosophy to life? And if it's not too big a question, how do you think that will continue to take shape going forward?
Well, firstly, I think that philosophy is innately built in me already.
Yeah,
I was raised by 2 very entrepreneurial parents who worked incredibly hard and managed and built their own destinies. And that built that kind of stamina and mindset within me from, throughout my childhood, I guess. So it's one thing to continue a legacy that's inbuilt within the business. I think it's another to continue to embody it and live by that principle, right? And try and set that as a positive example of what's possible within our business as well. It's one thing to say you can manage your own destiny. I think it's another to, from Dave's perspective, to make a decision like this and put me into this role is living proof of standing by it, right? If you show total commitment to managing your own destiny, because that's the bit, and I talk a lot about this with the team, it does take a heck of a lot of commitment. You have to be all in, and you can't manage your own destiny for half the week or just when you feel like it. That's the other
care,
bit.
Don't you?
You have to care.
Yeah.
So part of, the reason I'm saying this is because part of this has been me trying to codify or decode in a way what it means to manage your own destiny. Because so much of this up until now in my career and my life to date has been kind of running on this treadmill. And now I'm thinking, well, what are some of the learnings or what are some of the ways or the methods, I guess, that have enabled me to do that within Brandpie, and making sure that that is something I share and talk about with the team. And we have great conversations about it, but at the same time, I think it's really important to acknowledge that that takes an all-in mindset and mentality and a total commitment to whatever it is you're trying to achieve. I'm just a firm believer that any achievement comes through a lot of hard work and perseverance. And I think that's a really positive message to instill and set within the team. So we talk a lot about that now. So it's a new interpretation of it, but it's certainly the same recurring thread to your point. It's very important. It's what distinguishes us at Brandpie, to be honest. Particularly within our industry, firms I was at prior, that there was just no possibility to do that. Dave was probably the first leader I ever met who saw me as an asset rather than a threat, to be honest. And that is a huge, huge thing, because if you're ambitious and you're hungry and you're young and you're going full pelt, a lot of people try and hold you back or put you in your pen and say, oh, just wait there. And Dave was the first person who said, go for it.
Free range team. Just
not necessarily free reign, but certainly go for it, and that is something that I would love to do for somebody else.
Yeah. So leadership styles. Dave, you've talked about seeing that sort of potential in Will, if you like, over 5 years and watching him like a hawk. And I think it's probably easy to think that you were looking for somebody that was a younger version of you, but I don't necessarily think, having kind of watched this transition myself, that was the case. So my next question, I'm going to get you to reflect together on the similarities in your leadership styles, but also the differences, because it's interesting to understand, and it sort of relates to that question earlier about what leadership the world now needs, I guess. But what do you think the similarities and differences are between your leadership styles?
I think Will is much more go out there, get out there than I ever was. I don't mind getting out there, but only if it's sort of fits with how I feel. Whereas I think Will get out there and network and talk to people, and he really enjoys that. And that's a massive, massive add to the business. And then the bizarre thing is the number of times over the last 5 years where we think about something and then he says what I'm thinking, or I says what he's thinking. And that's really weird.
Yeah, in sync.
I've only had it with a couple of other people in my career. And when it happens, you go, okay, well, we've got a lot of things where we come to the same conclusion quite quickly and we handle things in the same way. And that's very reassuring. But you're also bringing additional skills and capabilities to the table that I haven't got and won't have. And so I would have employed somebody to do that. So I think we do analyze problems and come to the same solutions more often than not. But equally, when we're different and we've come to a different opinion, he's totally comfortable to tell me what he thinks.
Yeah, which is a big part of it, right?
Mm.
Yes, it's always been, though we've netted out at the same outcomes over the years, we've definitely also disagreed on things as well, but been very welcome to each other's opinion. And I think that that's a really important part, particularly in a creative business. It's really important actually to be challenged and to welcome being challenged, because if you just think your idea is the best idea in the world 24/7, you're on a hiding to nothing, So we have to be able to challenge one another. And I think we've always actually really enjoyed those exchanges together. But at the same time, I think we both have very high standards, and we both like to keep things very simple. There are some commonalities, I think, in the way that we compute and communicate that enable us to, and probably actually first time I've thought about this, but in thinking about the transition for the team, some of those characteristics have probably enabled a sense of continuity actually over this period, over the past year, because while there's a different energy perhaps and hunger that I'm trying to add into the culture of the business, I think at the same time some of our standards and ways of communicating, and we're both very values driven and care a lot about people as well. And the fact that we agree on all those things, I think, enables us to work really well together.
Yeah, it feels congruent to the team. It doesn't, you haven't had some mass exodus because you've got the new guard in, it's not that sort of, and you see that a lot when you get new senior leadership team is it feels so different that a lot of the team can't continue to work there because it doesn't feel like the same business anymore. And it does, to a large extent, it feels like Brandpie 2.0, that you taking it on from my point of view, looking from the outside in.
And what's funny is we say all of this, but I know from conversations with some of our folks that while some things have felt that there's been a great sense of continuity, others have shared it's felt extremely different this past year, and they've had to step into a slightly different gear, and that's a good thing as well,
And do you think that's driven by that hunger that you've just talked about, that wanting to inject a new energy and a new momentum into the business? Do you think that's what's felt different, or is it something else?
Well, as a human being, Rebecca, you know this, I'm a broken record when it comes to energy and momentum. They're the two words.
You're a cell bunny.
They're the two words I use on a daily basis. So, but yes, I think that speed, that energy, it's sure reflective maybe of my leadership style, but it's true just of the world at large, right? We are in such a fast-paced environment, decision-making so fast-paced, the ability to create now is faster than it's ever been. So it's also probably the leadership style that's really needed in this moment as well, to embrace that change of pace and change of speed in our thinking and our delivery, but not lose that element of maintaining the high standards and quality, because it's easy to just go full pelt speed. You don't want to miss out on the quality piece, because then you get into, subpar territory, and that's never ever where we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, final question then. Well, I have another final question, but we ask everybody. But thinking back across the last year, would you have done anything differently, do you think? What have been your kind of key reflections about that? If anything, you might think it was perfect.
I don't think it was perfect by any means, but I wouldn't do anything differently. Because even if we didn't get it right, or if there's something I might not repeat again, we learned from it. So I'm not really a big believer in looking back and thinking of all the things you would have changed, because even if you don't get something right, you learn something from it. So it's not been perfect, but we've learned a lot over the past year.
Okay, I'm going to reframe the question in that case.
That's cheating.
We'll keep the first question in, it's fine. But what have been the biggest learnings then in that first year? Dave's got his I've already got an answer grin on.
Oh, go on, Dave.
Unless he's just stuck. The screen's frozen.
I think the screen might have frozen.
You look smug.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wouldn't have, I don't think I would have changed anything, because you've got to let natural forces and people just flow. There are guardrails in place, and, there's a lot of strength in the culture. There's a lot of strength in the way we financially manage the business. There's a lot of strength in the way we're sort of building our brand. So the guardrails were there, but you've got to let Will run the company. I was available to him. We talk every week, but it's a case of what's on your agenda and what can I advise you on. There's occasional moments where I go, I think we should do this, but they're rare, and they're there as suggestions, not instructions. So I don't think I would do personally anything different. And, I was prepared for, a potential dip, because you're letting somebody loose.
Natural.
Yeah. And don't be frightened by that. Let Will take his time to get his feet under the table, let the new team in London figure out how to work together in a different dynamic. We're very fortunate in that we sell time. And when we're busy, you don't have time to think about the strategy and the business and things like that. You're literally working on clients. And we just had 2 major launches in the last 2 days and the culmination of sort of 9 months of intense work. And it really is intense. And that glues people together. That is the sort of, the backbone of the business. And then the running of the business and the things that we do in Singapore or the Nordics, those are on top of that. And so, there's an incredibly strong business with an incredibly strong flow of activity through it. And, Will's built on that. The big positive is the drive and energy. Just putting the next generation in charge has just unleashed an absolute sort of hose pipe or fire hose of human energy. And it's just fabulous to sit there and watch it. It really brilliant. Is just brilliant.
There you go. You're not a Duracell bunny, you're a fire hose of positive energy. Well, I know that.
These are going to go on my LinkedIn banner or whatever you call it.
Sure, you could get Mid-Journey to make you some sort of graphic up there.
I'm sure the team will when they hear this.
Oh, brilliant. I love it. So, Will, you've had time to reflect now, although I know you're probably listening to Dave as well. What do you think have been your biggest learnings in the last year?
I think I said it earlier, but the don't run before you can walk is I guess both a learning, but also a piece of advice I would give to anybody stepping into this role for the first time. But more than anything, I think I feel really proud of what we've achieved over the past year and what the team has delivered over the past year, and the way everybody embraced this change, I think says a lot about our culture and the fact that the business lent in versus kind of stepped back and thought, let's see how this unfolds. Everybody lent in. And, if you're stepping into this position and you're surrounded by people who do that, you've got a good chance of succeeding. So it's testament to the culture we've got within the business and the people we have, I think, that this has been such a positive moment for us.
Now, it sort of makes me think a bit about one of your earlier questions in terms of how are we different. I think Will's energized the business in a way I couldn't. And that is huge. I always sort of set myself an objective when I'm starting something, and it might take me 10 years, 15 years to get there. But once I get there, I sort of lose interest. And I think a lot of leaders are like that. They get to their objective. And putting the business into the shape it was in, I'd sort of achieved what I wanted to achieve in Europe. And so handing it over to Will, and it's not that I've lost interest in the business, it's just that I'd got it to a certain size and I was very comfortable with that, and it needed a different type of human being who was more dynamic, more energetic to take it to the next step. And you've got to recognize that as a leader. And I could see that I wasn't going to be the person that energized these very talented people to take them on their next journey. And that was a good move on my part, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think the other difference, just even observing today how you've both spoken about how you influence and how you lead, is, Dave, you're much more about sort of one-to-one relationships and leveraging those. And Will, you're, even in terms of Dave's reflection on how you've taken the business forward, that's far more sort of that one-to-many thinking. How can I have a really big impact? Whereas Dave, you're more about leveraging individual relationships as well. And it's like that. I wonder whether that's part what's at play there is that sort of, even that fire hose analogy, that's that sense of kind of outward energy, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably bang on.
Okay, I have one proper final question for you now that we ask everybody. So we ask every founder that we're talking to who's on the scaling journey if they have any advice for anybody else that's in that sort of messy middle period between startup and scale up. So I'm going to ask you that question, but I'm also going to ask you sort of to nuance it or make it a bit more specific as to whether you have any advice for people making this decision, if you like, to appoint their successor. Like one golden nugget that you would give to somebody in the same position as you.
Yeah, I think I said it earlier. You only take the decision when you're confident you're taking the right decision. If you've got any niggles, then you know you're doing the wrong thing. And you've got to be 100% sure that what you're doing is in your best interests and your company's best interests. And that would be it. 100% sure.
That's tough. Yeah. And it's really slowing down to make that decision as well, isn't it? To make sure that
don't rush it. Yeah. But it means you've got to start it probably 5 to 10 years before you take the decision.
Yeah.
If you're a founder, you've got to start the process way earlier than, this is not a job you can advertise on LinkedIn and just whack somebody in.
Absolutely. Always be succession planning. How about you, Will? What's your one piece of advice, I guess, for anyone stepping up into the role?
Maybe I'll play this through the lens of stepping into the role at this age as well, because it's interesting how much gets made of that in a way. I've never really thought about my age at all. And a message I actually share a lot with the team is don't ever let your age hold you back from doing anything. Because it's really easy to say, oh, I don't think I can reach out to that person because they're, so much more senior, they're far more experienced than I am, or they might not take me seriously. As soon as you plant that seed of doubt in your mind, you'll never do it. And even if you were to interact with them, it won't land because you don't look sure of yourself. So have total conviction in your capability and your belief. And that doesn't mean you know all the answers. Stay curious, ask great questions, but know you've got something of value to bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And as a young leader, I think that's really important because in order to be taken seriously, in order to gain the confidence of the people around you, number one, you have to appreciate the fact you might not have as much experience as everybody else. But I go back to my all-in commitment. You're going to do everything you can to learn, adapt fast, and give everything of yourself to the business and bring the skills that you have to the table with full force. So don't ever let your age hold you back from thinking you can be a great leader and learn to be a great leader.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you both so much. I've learned a lot from you both today. Things I thought I knew most of this journey, but it's been absolutely fascinating. So thank you both for joining me on the third seat, and wish you all the best for the next year and beyond.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for joining us on the third seat. I really hope this conversation gave you some reflection points, some insights, or some inspiration to think about how you can become a more intentional leader. If you have any questions or any reflections, please do get in touch. We love to hear from you and we'd love to answer some of your questions in a future podcast. In the meantime, follow the show and do join us again for more conversations with scale-up leaders. We've saved you a seat.